The question of price, if you drive that forward, that speaks to value. Expertise, if you drive that forward, it's thought leadership. And trust, if you drive that forward, is being a trusted advisor. And that's kind of where that all comes together.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Randall Craig. Here's 3 facts I think you should know about Randall. 1, he is one of Canada's internet pioneers. He put the Toronto Star online, the Globe and Mail's Globe Investor, Workopolis, and over 100 other well-known sites. 2, he is the author of 8 books, over 600 articles, 36 white papers, and all of them on the topic of digital strategy. Sounds like a lot of content, a lot of depth there. And 3, Randall helps organizations land their digital strategy. And he does that as a speaker, consultant, and leadership coach. Oh, and here's a 4th bonus point, just to let you know that Randall just isn't a boring business expert. He's also a human. He has written a musical. Maybe if we're lucky, he'll sing us a number from that play. And 2, don't go trying to push Randall around. He has a black belt in karate. Randall Craig, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thanks, George. It's great to be here.
Wonderful to talk with you. And it's funny, I think it was many years ago where the situation was reversed and I was a guest on your TV show. Now it's great to be interviewing you and plumbing the depths of your expertise. As a digital strategist, a specialist in digital strategy, one of the fields that you must encounter, and I'm curious about the connection, is the concept of thought leadership. Where does that fit into the digital strategy world? And is that something that people should pursue?
Yeah, I certainly think so. Certainly think so. In the olden days, if you were a thought leader, you probably, you appeared on the nightly news. Maybe a publisher picked up one of your books. But nowadays, the whole question of, are you a thought leader, is also a function of what do people find about you online? People get to test drive, your thinking by reading what you do online, searching for you on Google, all those kinds of things. One thing for sure, George, I can assure you, people don't care about you or me for that matter. People care about how we can solve their problems. So if you're a thought leader, this is the proof point, or the proof points rather, to allow somebody to answer the question, can George or Randall solve my problem? If you're not a thought leader, if you really don't have that expertise, who says you're an expert?
Now, I'm curious, can you help solve my problem? Is that a test on whether you might be a thought leader?
No. Whether you can solve a problem, you don't have to be a thought leader to be able to solve a problem. If you've got a broken faucet or a toilet, a plumber who's very competent, and there's many of them, can solve that particular problem. But particularly in the knowledge and service space, etc., this is one of the questions of how you differentiate yourself. And I think maybe a good way to sort of start is to step back and say, how do we compete as professionals? And a model that I absolutely love, I wrote about it years and years and years ago. It's called the price expertise trust model. And the idea is that everybody who's competing today competes amongst those 3 dimensions. Price, if your price is lower, obviously you might get the work. If you've got expertise, if you could solve their problem, if you will, that's one thing. There's different levels of expertise. And finally, trust. Does somebody trust you to be able to solve their problem. You may have the expertise, but if they're unsure, they're not likely to go to you. The question of price, if you drive that forward, that speaks to value. Expertise, if you drive that forward, it's thought leadership. And trust, if you drive that forward, is being a trusted advisor. And that's kind of where that all comes together.
So the greater your expertise, the more likely you can claim the label of a thought leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have to say that there's almost a funny way of looking at this. And if we look at expertise and trust, thought leadership and trusted advisor, if you imagine it like a 2x2 matrix, and up and down, it's trust, and left and right, it's thought leadership, it's expertise. And you could almost imagine somebody who's very, very low on trust and low on thought leadership, they're a commodity, not a good place to be. If somebody is highly trusted, but very, very low expertise, low thought leadership, well, I call those golfers. It's all about the relationship, but there's not so much expertise. If you've got very high thought leadership, but trust is low, I call that the academic. Nice place to be, but not exactly perfect. And if you've got a very high thought leadership and high trust, I call that the star. And that's kind of where we want to be. Thought leadership just by itself is not necessary. Otherwise, you're an academic. And trust isn't, that's also just not, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need thought leadership and we need a high degree of trust to be successful.
There's a productive relationship between trust and thought leadership if one wants to compete, especially, I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong here, especially in the service delivery world.
Yeah, I'd probably say almost every world. Going back to that plumber, if that plumber's got all the certifications or all they, whatever plumbers need, etc., but you don't trust that they're actually going to do a good job, you're probably not going to hire them either. If you go to a retail store, for example, it's the very same thing. You go there because you want to, if you go to Loblaws, for example, or Publix, whatever the particular grocery store, if you're not sure that meat is actually safe to eat, the trust level isn't high. It really works everywhere, but certainly for anybody in a service-based business, it's more important than other. And it kind of begs the question, George, okay, so fine. How do you actually define thought leadership? How do you know, or how do people generally know whether you're a thought leader or not? Because, George, honestly, I could say, well, you're a thought leader. I could say, well, I'm a thought leader, but who says? There's no thought leadership barometer that says, okay, you're it. Okay. Then people don't walk around with a sign that says, okay, I'm a thought leader. Well, I'm a better thought leader than the other. No, how? How? That's the big question.
And that's the question that I beg you to answer.
I've come up with 10 tests, and my suggestion here is for all of our listeners. Okay, just get a piece of paper, or maybe in your mind, say to yourself, is that me? Okay, or is that not me? And while you're actually thinking about, is that me or not me? Don't feel bad. Say, what can I do better in this particular dimension? Because everybody is either learning or forgetting. Everybody's doing something or not doing something. And so if we go through these things, well, guess what? We'll have a better sense. So let's get on with it. The first test I call the Google test. George, you want to take a guess as to what the Google test is all about?
Google your name?
No, it's not Google your name. Because I guarantee if I did a search for George Torok, I would come up with George Torok. There's probably a bunch of George Toroks. I know there's a bunch of Randall Craigs. But like I said earlier, people don't care about me. They care about how I might be able to solve a problem. So guess what? I speak on digital strategy. Go to Google and type in choosing a digital strategy speaker. And if you type choosing a digital strategy speaker, well, wouldn't it be nice if Randall Craig came up as one of the first on the list? Well,
that would pass the Google test.
That's right. But people don't just look for me as a digital strategy speaker. They also look to me for a whole bunch of other problems that I might be able to solve. And that, for our dear viewers and listeners, is what you need to do as well. And the more you're able to come up on the search, not through some, weird SEO thing, but just because, frankly, lots of people are, linking to you as the expert. Gee, you've got lots of deep content in that particular area as an expert. Those are the kinds of things that help naturally, organically rise your Google ranking. That's just one test. Okay, but it's not all the tests. The second is the social followers test. And this is something that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we never had. Social followers is basically the number of followers. If I went to you, George, and checked your Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, and there's only 37 people, I would probably say you don't have that many followers. Now, we all know that there's an entire influencer world out there where somebody's got 1 million followers and all they're doing is showing, I don't know, Instagram posts of them trying on clothes or whatever. Does that mean thought leadership? No, it doesn't. It just means they've got lots of followers. So the question about social followers isn't just the number, but it's the quality. So for our viewers or listeners right now, if you went into LinkedIn, if you're thinking about that, and you typically serve people at the C level, just as an example, are all of your LinkedIn connections, are they C-level type people? Or are they just miscellaneous people? It's the quality of the followers, the quality of the connections, not just the number. Number makes a difference, right? It's like width times length is the area. You want a big area, but you need the depth. So that's a social followers test. The next test is something called the activity level test. And the activity level test is really the question of how active are you, particularly online? Are you posting, for example, once a week? A thoughtful blog. Are you doing videos, for example, with stuff that demonstrates your expertise and therefore shows your, I don't want to say shows thought leadership, but at least there's something that your followers can attach onto. Are you tweeting from time to time? Now, let's just face it. Most of my clients are in the business space. In fact, all of them are. So right now, TikTok is very, very hot, but I'm not so sure if that many of my particular clients are on TikTok. Now, you could get lost for hours watching entertaining and silly TikToks, right? But that's not entertainment. That's not business. That's not thought leadership. Some people might actually, if they go on TikTok and develop a following, etc., and post on TikTok every week or every day, etc., maybe that does demonstrate their expertise, and therefore, they've got a chance of getting thought followers. But it's a question of where, not just the number, etc., and how often you do it. How many blog posts you have? How many thoughtful articles? How many different recorded webinars? How often do you do it? And you could typically check this out on other people as well. The more active they are in the right places, the more likely they might be a thought leader. Clear so far?
That's good. So there's first 3 tests. And so do we rate ourselves on a scale of 1 to 10 if we're looking at that, or is it yes or no?
I think there's really 2 questions. Number 1, is this test important in my business? Because sometimes it's not important. Okay. And the second question is, assuming it's important, what can I do to move myself up just one level? It doesn't matter yes or no. It matters the direction and whether it's worthwhile. Because, for example, if I was going to be doing a video podcast like this one, right, it takes an awful lot of effort. But it may very well be that for my particular target audiences, I should be doing white papers, or I should be doing some other activity in the real world, not just online. So it's really what's the benefit and cost of going up that next level, and that's kind of the important two questions. Okay, the fourth one is what I call peer acknowledgement, and this isn't just a question of you and your buddies going out to play hockey, and they say, "Oh, George, you are great at playing hockey," although that would be nice, right? Well, here's the challenge here. Peer acknowledgement isn't just everyone saying, "You know what? Speak to Randall. He might be able to help." Gee, speak to Randall. Okay. But it's also the public acknowledgement of that, because people just saying, "Speak to Randall, he can help," that's not something other people can check out. Yes, they can ask people in the network, who should I go to? Who might be helpful? But I'm talking about other things. A year or two ago, I was very, very proud. I was acknowledged, part of my life is advising organizations. So I'm a consultant. And, like most people who are involved in a particular field, they're a member of, and they get a certification, a CMC, Certified Management Consultant in my case. I was given the fellow designation. It's kind of like the Consultants Hall of Fame, if you will, for my contributions to the field of consulting. That was very meaningful to me. And that's an example of third-party recognition. CSAE a year or two ago also gave me something for my contributions to the Canadian Not-for-Profit Association world. Only about a dozen people have ever been given this particular award. So that's something that's verifiable. And you don't need to have these big highfalutin awards, if you will. It's a question of what can you do to improve the acknowledgement that you get from your peers. And if you're able to do that, it's more likely that you are a thought leader. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have people saying, "Gee, who can help? Gee, George can, or Randall can," then you're probably not as much of a thought leader. That's the fourth. The fifth is what I call the economic test. And the economic test is very simple. Gee, how much are you getting paid? How much are you worth? If you're worth an awful lot more, then people might think that you're actually worth an awful lot more. And so if you have a question of somebody who's consulting, and to do task X, it's 20,000, and somebody else says, "Well, I could do it for 8,000." It's probably because there's such a huge difference between those amounts. You'd probably say the person that's charging more probably has more expertise. They're probably more of a thought leader. And that's true for just about everything. It's not always fair. Okay, that's a different thing. But generally speaking, somebody who's doing something successfully will be paid more. Somebody who's got more experience will be paid more. And whether it's salary, whether it's consulting fees, or in my case, speaking fees, it's the same kind of thing. So those are the top five. What do you think, George?
Well, they make sense to me. And on that last one, I'm guessing, so one might think that the engineers at Mercedes-Benz are clearly greater thought leaders than the engineers at General Motors because of the difference in the price of the cars.
Well, I guess that's a completely different dimension. And that's the question of what's the impact of price on brand value. If you look at the price of a Mercedes versus a General Motors, Mercedes generally are a lot more expensive, but the cachet that goes with the Mercedes name is also a lot more. But I bet that the top electric battery engineer at Mercedes is probably paid about the same as the top electric battery engineer at General Motors. Maybe the Tesla guy might be paid a little bit more. I don't know, right? But the idea is that both are thought leaders in their space. And that is different than the perception of the brand. Now, I will have to say something else. Because the value of Mercedes brand is so much higher than, say, General Motors, it may very well be that Mercedes could pay less for their engineers because the value of working at Mercedes for the engineer is partly paid by the value of the brand and not just the value of the paycheck. So that's a different kind of question than thought leadership, but I think it was a great point. Thanks for asking it.
All right. But what's apparent to me anyways at this point is that these tests, no single one is a clear indicator. It's just a part of a compilation of indicators.
Yeah, it certainly is. And let me give a completely different metaphor because I think this is interesting and most people realize. When it comes to brand, you brought up, we talked about brand just a second ago, okay? When we talk about brand, how do we define brand? Well, there's two definitions that I like to use. One of them is what people say about you behind your back, what the buzz on the street is, if you will. But put that one aside, and you could define brand as really three things. One is what you say, two is what you do, and three is what you represent. And the beauty of that is simple. What you represent is not something that you can kind of directly impact, but you can impact what you represent by what you say and what you do. And when it comes to thought leadership as well, to your point precisely, all these 10 tests, and we've done 5 of them so far, those are all the what you say, what you do. It's not what you represent. And if you're able to work on all these 10, then guess what? People will say, aha, he or she is a thought leader, right? Because it'll be apparent to them. And these are the levers, these 10 levers, things that you can actually do something about. Make sense?
Makes sense, yeah. So what you say and what you do affect the perception of
what you represent.
Others have of you as a possible thought leader.
Yes. What you say and what you do definitely affects your brand. And if part of your brand is thought leadership, and that's really what we're talking about today, your brand can represent a whole bunch of other things too, obviously. But yes, absolutely. Test 6 is what I call the traditional media test. And what I mean by this, George, is how often are you on traditional media? How often are you on the morning show? How often are you quoted in a national newspaper or in trade magazines, as opposed to the online only social online media, bloggers, podcasters, etc. Because if traditional media thinks that you are an appropriate spokesperson on a particular topic, then that is a very, very important endorsement of your thought leadership. Presuming once you actually get on TV or radio or in the newspaper, you say something intelligent. But it's a huge, huge endorsement. But it's not the only one. There's 9 others. The next is the longevity test. This is very simple. How long have you been doing it? I remember having a coaching meeting with a young person. They had just graduated from business school, and they told me they were a thought leader on the topic of such and such. And I said, "Oh, that's good." Now, really, what I was thinking is, yeah, that's good. They understand the concept of thought leadership, but you know what? I'm not so sure if they would have passed the longevity test. And the longevity test is simple. It takes time, years, to develop deep, deep knowledge and expertise. In my intro, you said, I put the Toronto Star online, and this was a time very, very early in the internet's. It was an infant, literally. That people didn't know what the heck the thing was, let alone large organizations like Torstar, the owner of the Toronto Star. And it was a wonderful time because you can literally create something But what you learn between then and now, which is decades later, is absolutely huge. You layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And it's not to say that that 23-year-old wasn't a thought leader in their particular space. But, I can guarantee if they continued where they were going in 10 or 20 or 30 years, they'd be incredible. Malcolm Gladwell says, well, it's 10,000 hours. Okay, this is just another way of saying it. But I can guarantee you, if you have 20,000 hours, you'll have a lot more thought leadership in that particular space, just because you'll have seen more and you will have understood it.
I understood. And it's interesting. One, I'm guessing that one of the parameters, it might be to publish traditional, like a book, for example. And when I published my book on marketing, after I published the book, I started to learn much more about marketing, because now I saw the world differently. That speaks to your point about the longevity.
Yeah. Now the author speaker test is another one. Thank you. And I didn't even give you the list beforehand, George. I'm very impressed. The author speaker test is important for two reasons. Number one, as an author, you've got to do a lot of research. You've got to put something together in a whole that perhaps wasn't done before. As an author, you get quoted, whether it's in media or whether it's with your target market. I have to tell you a very funny story. Maybe around 15, 18 years ago, management consultant, I had written my first book, etc. And I was in the midst of doing it. And I thought, well, you know what? People are starting to ask me to speak. Why don't I join the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, which is where we met years ago. And I went there and I looked at the various members and I thought, why don't I take a look at their websites? And there was this one fellow, Peter Erzbender, who was the co-author, George, of your book. And I went to his, and sadly he's passed away, a very impressive man. He had a bunch of articles. He had around 15 or 20 articles on his website. And I thought, well, let me just read those. And I read them. They were fantastic. They got me thinking in different ways. And I read every single one of them. And after that, George, I kid you not, I was depressed. Why? Because how could little old me, okay, despite having so much experience, how could I ever even aspire to get to the level of him? And it was very depressing. And what can I do? I thought, okay, I'm never going to look at this website again. And I didn't actually. I just decided that was a very good strategy. I had lots of ideas. Why don't I start writing? And here, I don't know, maybe around 5 or 10 years ago, I guess I was asked to be a speaker for a whole bunch of others who wanted to learn about how to do business planning for speaking, etc. And I thought, okay, why don't I go and do a little bit of a discussion on thought leadership. And I thought I would count the number of articles that I had on my website. And I had about 100 or so. I have about 600 now at randallcraig.com. But this is the problem. I wasn't looking at other people after that first very depressing sort of review of this, giant. Okay, I just thought to myself, why don't I start doing this? It's not where you are. It's really what can you do on each of these 10 dimensions to get the next level. And so the author test is important for one other reason too. Nowadays, anyone can be an author, self-publishing. And there's nothing wrong with being a self-published author. But it's different than being an author that's being published by a traditional publishing house. And the reason why is because if you get picked up by a traditional publishing house, an agent likely has said, yes, this person is worthwhile. There we go, back to thought leadership. Then the agent has got to sell it to an acquiring editor at a publishing house. And the acquiring editor says, yes, this person is a thought leader as well. Then it's got to be sold into the stores. The buyer of the bookstores then has to say, yes, this is a book that'll sell because that person's a thought leader. Then eventually it'll sell, right? So being an author from a traditional publisher has an even higher level of importance with respect to judging whether somebody's a thought leader or not. Now, of course, there's been plenty of traditionally published books that are terrible, right? So it's not just this by itself. Speaker, it's the same thing. If somebody is going to pay 5 figures to hear me speak at a conference, then they probably have done their due diligence and said, yeah, that guy's probably a thought leader in his particular area. And by the way, he's probably a pretty good communicator too, right? So that's the author speaker test. There's one other one that I think is also pretty funny. George, I call it the fancy title test. What do you think that is?
The fancy title test. Now, is that the title that one gives to oneself or the title that others give to you? So people who call themselves the chief relationship officer, chief value creator, and they come up with these funny titles. Are those titles worth anything?
So let's just say that you were a scientist at a pharmaceutical company, and you had the title chief vaccine officer or something like that. Guess what? That probably makes a difference, right? As opposed to junior scientist, right? So it depends on who is giving the titles. And secondly, it depends on how senior and descriptive that actual title is. You and I are both entrepreneurs. George, I don't even want to ask what your title is. Okay. Canada's podcast guru, I don't know, but there's a whole bunch of things you can call yourself. And you're absolutely right. Perhaps they don't make a difference in terms of thought leadership. Okay. And in fact, it can sometimes do the opposite. People say, oh, you kidding, Randall? Really? No, I don't think so. So-and-so is, so-and-so is. But on the other hand, giving yourself a title, if that's what you want to do, it's a positioning tool, which is different than a thought leadership, test tool. So if you want to position yourself as something, you can give yourself a title, but you just have to make sure that it doesn't strain the credibility of the listener.
That almost sounds more like going back to the branding analogy versus actual proof of thought leadership.
Yep, exactly. Maybe the last test, well, maybe the second last test number 10 is what I call the community involvement test. How often, George, and this is a question to all of our listeners and viewers, has somebody come up to you and tapped you on the shoulder and said, you know something, I think you'd be pretty good on our board because of such and such. You know something, we're thinking of starting such and such. We'd like you to be involved in so and so. When you get together with a group of people informally to organize something, do people tend to look to you because of your expertise in a particular area? Randall knows a lot about marketing and technology, digital strategy. What do you think about this, Randall? That's what I mean by the community involvement test. The stuff that you're doing where somebody is actually, tapping you on the shoulder, okay, or implicitly saying, let's get so-and-so to do something. Because if other people recognize you as the person who should be doing that or could be doing that, then that's an important test. So these are 10 tests. But honestly, George, there's one test that's more important than all of them, okay? Call it number 11. What do you think it is?
Number 11. Wow. Now you got me thinking, and I don't know what to say. I'm thinking that you actually make a difference, that you add value.
You are so close to what I was thinking. Okay. And I know I put you on the spot. The most important test is relevance. Right? Because honestly, if your thought leadership is not relevant to me, then who cares? I don't really care who the Canada's top plumber is or America's friendliest, most competent dog trainer is. Those two things aren't really in my wheelhouse. For me, that's not important. Relevance is more important than anything else, right? Relevance to your particular market. And that's kind of how I think about these. And for our listeners, gee, here's 10 tests, right? You can actually say, okay, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at this. I'm good at this. I never thought of that. And the question is, how do you move it up the next level? Because as you sort of move from low to high, you move from commodity to academic, okay? Or at a higher trust level, you go from a golfer to a star. And if you want to be, competitive today, you really need to, in my view anyway, you need to not ignore the potential of thought leadership as an important part of the marketing and go-to-market strategy that you have, either as an individual, frankly, or as an organization.
Randall, what I'm hearing is that thought leadership isn't necessarily a point or a position, it's a continuum.
Yep. And it's a continuum within the context of relevance, right? Because, for example, if I was a thought leader in the area of childcare, does a title really matter? Probably not. Do the number of followers that I have on Instagram or Facebook, does that part matter? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But depending on where you are, each of these 10 tests and how people gauge whether you are or are not a thought leader becomes relevant. And by the way, if we go back to the very beginning of our discussion, remember I said price, expertise, trust, everybody competes somewhere in this triangle between the three of them. It could very well be that if you're in a pure commodity business, the only thing that matters is price, not expertise or trust. And so, your strategy is, how do I drive my costs as low as possible so my price can be as low as possible? Why would you ever spend a nickel building thought leadership if truly you only compete on price? And by the way, expertise, if you really compete just on expertise, you can do tons and tons of training, tons and tons of these tests, et cetera, to move yourselves up, et cetera. Okay. Sadly, there'll always be somebody who's a bit smarter than you. Okay. Or you can say, well, gee, maybe I'm just going to compete on trust. Right. But eventually people say, well, can you really solve my problem? Do you really is your expertise up to date? Yeah, I love you, George, but are you yesterday's news? So it starts to sort of, show me the proof that you've got up-to-date expertise. Now, nobody competes only on one of them. They always compete on a certain percentage of each of them. It's like you've got 100 effort points, split them between price, expertise, and trust. And so where are you going to be? And whether it's on expertise, thought leadership, or trust, becoming a trusted advisor, there are different things that you can do online and off that can move you up and make it more effective. But once again, that 11th test, the question of relevance. If people only are shopping, if you will, to use that crass term, based on price, well, guess what? You got to make sure your price is lower. But gee, if you can work on the other two dimensions, maybe you'll have something that can differentiate you and drive a higher price and greater value for your particular target market.
Randall, if people want to learn more about you and learn about how you might help them in terms of providing advice, where they can improve their digital strategy, your website is randallcraig.com, Randall with 2 L's at the end, Craig with a C, R-A-I-G. Now, also, there's a white paper that they might interest them that's available. The white paper is called Driving the Client Journey, Relationship Marketing in the Digital World. And what I find key there, 2 relevant points, is one is about the relationship, and 2, in the digital world, because that's where our relationship seems to be these days. It's all in the digital world. They can find that white paper at randallcraig.net/relationship. That's at randallcraig.net/relationship. Randall Craig, It's been a delight having you on the podcast today. You've given us a lot to think about with the tests for thought leadership and where we are on that scale. I'll leave the audience with this final thought that you're seen, you're measured, your impact is based on what you say, what you do, and what you represent.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.